My husband accused me of stealing $1,400 from our account. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, until the bank footage from that morning surfaced, showing exactly who had walked through the door. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about trust was turned upside down. My name is Bella, and this is the story of how a single bank statement nearly destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I sat at our kitchen table staring at the bank statement, the numbers blurring together as tears filled my eyes. David had just accused me of stealing $14,800 from our joint account. His voice had been cold, detached, like I was a stranger he'd caught red-handed. I'd never seen him look at me that way before. How could he think I was capable of such betrayal? The accusation hung between us like a wall I couldn't climb over. David stood by the sink, his back turned to me, shoulders rigid with anger and disappointment. We'd been married for 12 years, and in all that time, I'd never given him a reason to doubt my honesty. I managed our household budget, paid the bills, saved for our daughter Emma's college fund. Why would I suddenly become a thief? I tried to explain that I hadn't touched the account beyond our usual expenses, but David's jaw remained set. He'd already called the bank, demanding to see security footage from Tuesday morning when the withdrawal was made. The manager had agreed to review it with us Thursday afternoon. 2 days felt like an eternity when your husband questioned your integrity. What would the footage show that could possibly clear my name? Emma bounced into the kitchen, oblivious to the tension crackling around us. At 8 years old, she still believed her parents were infallible, that our marriage was as solid as the oak tree in our backyard. She asked why Daddy looked sad, and I forced a smile, telling her everything was fine, but everything wasn't fine, and I wondered how long we could keep pretending. Would she sense something had fundamentally shifted between us? That night, David slept in the guest room. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Tuesday morning in my mind. I'd dropped Emma at school, stopped for coffee, went grocery shopping, picked up dry cleaning. Nothing unusual, nothing that would explain $14,000 vanishing from our account. The empty space beside me in bed felt like a preview of my future. Was this how marriages ended, with accusations and separate bedrooms? Wednesday dragged by in a haze of forced normalcy. I packed Emma's lunch, attended my book club meeting, watered the garden, all while carrying this crushing weight in my chest. My best friend Sarah noticed something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. How do you tell someone your husband thinks you're a thief? How do you admit your marriage might be crumbling over money you never touched? David barely spoke to me all day, communicating only about Emma's schedule and household logistics. When he did look at me, I saw disappointment mixed with something that looked like grief. It was as if he was already mourning our relationship, already preparing for whatever ugly truth the bank footage might reveal. I caught him staring at our wedding photo on the mantel with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was he remembering happier times or questioning everything we'd built together? Thursday morning arrived with gray skies that matched my mood. Emma seemed to pick up on the strange atmosphere, clinging to me longer than usual before school. I kissed her forehead and promised everything would be okay, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. David and I drove to the bank in silence, the radio filling the space where conversation used to flow easily. Could our marriage survive this level of mistrust and suspicion? The bank manager, Mrs. Chen, greeted us with professional sympathy. She led us to a small conference room where a computer monitor waited, ready to show us the security footage from Tuesday morning. My hands trembled as I sat down, David's chair positioned deliberately far from mine. Mrs. Chen explained they'd isolated the timestamp when the withdrawal occurred and identified the person who'd entered the branch. Who could it possibly be if not me? The footage began to play, showing the bank's main entrance from Tuesday morning. I watched people come and go, customers I didn't recognize conducting their everyday business. My heart pounded as the timestamp approached the moment when our money was taken. David leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the table edge. Then, at exactly 10:47 a.m., a familiar figure walked through the bank's glass doors. It wasn't me. My mother-in-law, Patricia, appeared on screen wearing the blue coat I'd bought her last Christmas. She moved with purpose toward the teller counter, her silver hair perfectly styled as always. I felt David's sharp intake of breath beside me, but I couldn't look away from the monitor. Patricia had always been critical of our spending habits, always offering unsolicited financial advice. But this was beyond anything I'd imagined her capable of. The footage showed Patricia presenting identification and speaking earnestly with the teller. She'd somehow accessed our account, our money we'd saved for Emma's future and our own security. David's face had gone pale, his earlier anger replaced by shock and confusion. His mother had raised him alone after his father died, sacrificed everything for his education, his future. How could the woman who'd taught him about integrity have stolen from us? Mrs. Chen fast-forwarded to show Patricia leaving the bank, an envelope tucked discreetly in her purse. The transaction record confirmed she'd withdrawn exactly $14,800 from our account using forged documentation. My hands shook as the reality sank in. David's mother had stolen from us, then let him believe I was the thief. How long had she been planning this betrayal of our trust and her son's heart? David sat in stunned silence as Mrs. Chen explained the bank's next steps. They'd file a report, work with authorities to recover the funds, strengthen their verification procedures. But none of that addressed the deeper wound, the fact that his mother had not only stolen from us, but allowed him to destroy his marriage with accusations. I reached for his hand tentatively, unsure if he was ready to accept comfort. Would he blame himself for trusting her? Or me for not defending myself more forcefully? We drove home in a different kind of silence than we'd shared that morning. This wasn't the cold quiet of suspicion, but the heavy stillness that follows devastating revelations. David kept glancing at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in days, guilt and regret written across his features. I felt angry and vindicated and heartbroken all at once. Yes, I was innocent, but at what cost to our family's foundation? That evening, David called his mother while Emma played upstairs. I heard fragments of the conversation through our bedroom door, his voice rising with hurt and disbelief as Patricia apparently tried to justify her actions. When he hung up, he was crying, something I'd only seen him do twice before in our entire marriage. His mother's betrayal had shattered something fundamental in him, some core belief about love and trust. How do you comfort someone whose foundation has just crumbled beneath them? He found me in the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me, apologizing over and over for doubting me. His words were muffled against my hair, but I heard the raw pain in his voice, the way it broke when he tried to explain how sorry he was. I held him back, feeling his shoulders shake with silent sobs. We stood there for a long time, two people trying to understand how someone we loved could hurt us so deeply. Would we ever feel safe trusting anyone completely again? Patricia had apparently taken the money to pay off gambling debts she'd hidden from everyone. Years of small bets had snowballed into a crushing financial burden she couldn't escape. When confronted, she broke down and confessed everything. The lies, the forged documents, the decision to let David suspect me rather than admit her own failures. She'd rationalized that we could afford the loss better than she could afford the shame. But what about the shame of letting her son destroy his marriage over her crimes? The money would eventually be returned, the legal matters resolved, but the emotional damage felt irreparable. David struggled with guilt over accusing me, while I grappled with anger at being so easily doubted by the man who claimed to love me unconditionally. We'd both learned painful lessons about the fragility of trust and the weight of assumptions. Emma asked why Grandma couldn't visit anymore, and we stumbled through explanations that protected her innocence while acknowledging our new reality. How do you explain to a child that adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people they love? I found myself questioning everything about our relationship that I'd previously taken for granted. If David could so quickly believe I was capable of theft, what other assumptions did he make about my character? The foundation of our marriage felt shaken in ways that went beyond his mother's crime. We started couples counseling, working to rebuild trust that had been damaged by both his accusations and my hurt at being so easily condemned. Would we emerge stronger from this trial, Or would the cracks prove too deep to repair? Patricia's addiction had been invisible to all of us, hidden behind her composed exterior and judgmental comments about fiscal responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who'd criticized our spending had been secretly gambling away her savings and eventually ours. David struggled to reconcile the mother he'd admired with the desperate woman who'd stolen from us. Each day brought new revelations about debts and lies we'd never suspected. How many other secrets had we missed while trusting blindly in family bonds? The healing process moved slowly, marked by conversations that stretched deep into the night. David and I talked about trust and forgiveness, about the assumptions we make about people we love, about the difference between forgiveness and rebuilding faith. We couldn't simply return to the innocence we'd shared before, but perhaps we could create something stronger from the broken pieces. Emma watched us carefully during this time, sensing change without understanding its source. Would she remember this as the period when her parents grew closer or began to drift apart? Some days I felt hopeful about our future. Others, the hurt felt too raw to bear. David's remorse was genuine, but I struggled to let go of the pain of being so quickly condemned. We were learning that love alone isn't enough. Relationships require faith that survives testing, communication that bridges misunderstanding, commitment that endures even when trust falters. Our marriage counselor helped us navigate these treacherous waters, but ultimately the work of rebuilding had to come from us. Could we choose each other again after everything that had been revealed and broken? 3 months later, we're still finding our way back to each other. The bank footage had shown us the truth about Patricia, but it had also revealed uncomfortable truths about us, about how quickly suspicion can poison love, how easily we can wound the people closest to us. David has worked hard to rebuild my faith in his faith in me, but some scars take time to fade completely. We're different people than we were before this happened, perhaps wiser but certainly more cautious. Is this growth, or have we lost something irreplaceable in our journey back to trust? The money has been returned. Patricia is in treatment for her gambling addiction, and Emma continues to fill our home with laughter and innocence. But I sometimes catch David looking at me with a mixture of love and regret, as if he's still apologizing for those few days when he saw me as a stranger capable of betrayal. I'm learning to see that look not as a reminder of his doubt, but as evidence of how much he values what we almost lost. Still, I wonder if either of us will ever again take our trust for granted, or if we'll always carry this awareness of how quickly everything can change. The weeks that followed brought a strange new rhythm to our household. David and I moved around each other with careful politeness, like dance partners learning new steps after years of natural movement. Emma noticed the change but couldn't quite name it, asking why we spoke so softly now, why Daddy brought me flowers on random Tuesdays. I told her we were learning to be extra kind to each other, which wasn't entirely untrue. But kindness born from guilt felt different than kindness born from love, didn't it? Our marriage counselor, Dr. Martinez, gave us homework assignments that felt both silly and profound. This week's task was to share one thing we appreciated about each other every morning before coffee. David's offerings were thoughtful but careful, thanking me for Emma's lunch notes, for keeping our home organized, for my patience during this difficult time. His gratitude felt genuine but guarded, as if he was still afraid to assume too much about my forgiveness. What would it take for him to stop walking on eggshells around me? I struggled with my own responses during these morning exchanges. Some days, I genuinely felt grateful for his efforts to rebuild what we'd lost. Other days, I had to dig deep to find appreciation that didn't feel forced or hollow. The hardest part was admitting that his doubt had awakened doubts in me too. Not about his love, but about how well we actually knew each other. If he could believe I was a thief so easily, what other misconceptions did we carry? Were we rebuilding our marriage or just constructing a prettier facade? Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called to check in about her behavior at school. Apparently, Emma had been asking her classmates if their parents ever stopped talking to each other for days at a time. My heart broke imagining my 8-year-old trying to make sense of the tension she'd felt at home, even when we thought we were hiding it well. Children are such careful observers of their parents' emotional weather. How much of our storm had we inadvertently shared with her innocent world? Patricia's treatment program required family sessions that David attended alone. He came home from these meetings looking drained and confused, sharing fragments of revelations about his mother's gambling addiction and the shame that had driven her to increasingly desperate measures. She'd been hiding this problem for over 3 years, funding her losses with credit cards, small loans, and finally our money when everything else ran out. How had someone who raised such an honest man learned to lie so skillfully to everyone she claimed to love? The legal proceedings moved slowly but steadily forward. Our lawyer assured us the money would be fully recovered, but the emotional cost felt immeasurable. David had to testify about his mother's character while simultaneously acknowledging her crime, a psychological balancing act that left him exhausted. I watched him age months in weeks, the stress carving new lines around his eyes. Part of me wanted to comfort him through this pain, while another part still nursed hurt over his quick assumption of my guilt. Could I be angry at his mother and sympathetic to his loss simultaneously? Our neighbors, the Hendersons, invited us for a barbecue, and I realized how isolated we'd become during this crisis. Social interactions felt challenging when you're carrying secrets about family betrayal and marital repair. Sarah, my book club friend, finally cornered me during the gathering and asked directly what was wrong. I gave her an abbreviated version of events, watching her face cycle through shock, sympathy, and protective anger on my behalf. Did having witnesses to our pain make it more real or somehow easier to bear? David's sleep was restless now, and I often woke to find him staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. When I asked what kept him awake, he admitted to replaying every conversation he'd ever had with his mother, looking for signs he should have seen. The woman who'd taught him right from wrong had been living a double life, and that contradiction shattered his understanding of basic human nature. I reached for his hand in those dark hours, offering comfort even when my own heart still felt bruised. How do you help someone grieve the person they thought they knew? Emma announced at dinner that she was making Father's Day gifts at school and needed to know what made Daddy special. David's eyes filled with tears at this innocent question, and I saw how desperately he wanted to deserve his daughter's uncomplicated love. I helped her craft a card that celebrated his patience, his bedtime stories, his pancake-making skills, all the ways he showed love that had nothing to do with money or trust or adult complications. Would Emma always remember these small moments of tenderness, or would she someday understand the larger context of this difficult time? Dr. Martinez suggested we try doing something normal together as a family, something unrelated to banks or therapy or legal proceedings. We chose mini-golf, a silly activity that had made us laugh during our dating years. Emma beat us both spectacularly while David and I cheered her impossible hole-in-one on the windmill obstacle. For 2 hours, we almost felt like ourselves again, just parents enjoying their child's joy. But as we drove home, the weight of our unresolved issues settled back into the car with us. Was healing possible through small joys, or were we just postponing harder conversations? The insurance company investigating Patricia's forgery required David to provide character testimony about our relationship and financial habits. Sitting in that sterile office, listening to him describe me as trustworthy and responsible to strangers felt both vindicating and hollow. These were words he should never have had to say under oath, truths that should have been obvious to him when doubt first crept in. I appreciated his public support while privately mourning the innocence we'd lost. Would official vindication help heal private wounds, or were some injuries too deep for external validation? Patricia called one evening while David was helping Emma with homework. I answered without thinking, and her voice, shaky and small, asked if she could speak to her son. When I hesitated, she began crying, apologizing for what she'd done to me, to our family, to David's trust in everyone he loved. Her remorse sounded genuine, but I wasn't ready to offer forgiveness just because she was suffering consequences. How do you respond to someone whose actions nearly destroyed your marriage, especially when that someone raised the man you're still learning to trust again? Emma's questions about Grandma Patricia became more frequent and specific. Why didn't she come for Sunday dinners anymore? When would she see her again? Would she be at Emma's upcoming dance recital? David and I struggled to craft age-appropriate explanations that preserved his mother's relationship with Emma while acknowledging that trust had to be rebuilt slowly. We settled on saying that Grandma was learning better ways to handle her problems and needed time to get better. But Emma's disappointed face reminded us that our family's healing affected more than just the two of us. How do you protect a child's innocence while teaching necessary lessons about broken trust? Our financial advisor, recommended by Dr. Martinez, helped us establish new security measures for our accounts and assets. Setting up additional protections felt both practical and symbolic. We were learning to guard against future betrayals while working to repair current damage. David signed every document with careful attention to detail, as if perfect paperwork could somehow undo the chaos his mother had created. I watched him trying to control what could be controlled, while everything else remained uncertain. Would new safeguards make us feel more secure? Or would they just remind us daily of how vulnerable we'd been? 3 months after the bank footage revelation, David suggested we take a weekend trip without Emma. Just the two of us trying to remember who we were before distrust moved into our spare bedroom. We drove to a cabin 2 hours north, the same place we'd honeymooned 13 years earlier. The trees were different now, fuller and more mature, like us. We spent the first day barely talking, both afraid to say something that might break the fragile peace we were building. What conversations were we avoiding, and how long could we postpone them? On our second evening at the cabin, David finally asked the question I'd been dreading, whether I would ever fully forgive him for doubting me. I wanted to say yes immediately, to smooth away his guilt and pretend healing was that simple. Instead, I told him the truth, that forgiveness and forgetting were different things, that I was choosing to work toward the first while accepting I might never achieve the second. His face crumpled with the realization that some damage can't be completely undone. But maybe acceptance of that reality was the beginning of something more honest than what we'd had before. We made love that weekend for the first time since the accusation, and afterward we both cried. For relief, for sorrow, for the complex emotions that bodies can express when words fail. Physical intimacy had been another casualty of broken trust, and reclaiming it felt like a small victory in our larger war for wholeness. David held me afterward like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go too soon. I wanted to stay in that moment where touch spoke louder than doubt, where our bodies remembered love even when our minds struggled with forgiveness. Could physical reconnection lead to emotional healing? Or were we just postponing deeper reckonings? Driving home from the cabin, we talked about our future with more hope than we'd managed in months. Emma's dance recital was next week, followed by her summer break, family vacation plans, David's work promotion possibility, normal life considerations that felt extraordinary after months of crisis management. We were both different people than we'd been before Patricia's betrayal, perhaps more careful with each other, but also more intentional about choosing love over assumption. As familiar landmarks came into view, I wondered if we were returning home to rebuild our old life or create something entirely new from the ashes of what we'd lost. Emma ran to greet us when we walked through the door, chattering about her weekend with Sarah's family and all the plans she'd made for summer adventures. Her easy joy reminded us what we were fighting for, not just our marriage, but the stable foundation she needed to grow into someone who could trust and be trusted. David and I exchanged glances over her head, and I saw my own determination reflected in his eyes. We would do this work, however long it took, however difficult it became, because love without trust might survive, but it wouldn't thrive, and we wanted more than survival for ourselves and our daughter. The question remaining was whether we could truly learn to believe in each other again, or if we'd simply learn to function despite our doubt. Emma's summer break began with her asking to invite friends for sleepovers, something that used to feel effortless, but now required David and I to coordinate like business partners. We'd developed a habit of checking with each other about every decision, as if our previous assumptions about parenting teamwork couldn't be trusted either. When I mentioned this observation to Dr. Martinez, she called it hypervigilance, a natural response to having our foundation shaken. But when would normal confidence return? And how would we recognize it when it did? Patricia's first supervised visit with Emma was scheduled for the following Tuesday at a family center downtown. David would accompany them while I waited in the parking lot, close enough to help if needed, but far enough to avoid the complicated emotions Patricia's presence stirred in me. Emma was excited to see her grandmother, having no real understanding of why these visits now required special arrangements and neutral locations. How do you explain addiction and betrayal to someone whose biggest worry is which flavor ice cream to choose? The night before the visit, David couldn't sit still. He paced the kitchen while I made Emma's lunch for the next day, opening and closing cabinet doors without taking anything out. When I asked what he was thinking, he admitted he was terrified Patricia would say something to hurt Emma or make promises she couldn't keep. His protective instincts toward our daughter had intensified since learning how easily people could disappoint the ones they claimed to love. Would he ever feel safe letting Emma trust anyone outside our immediate family again? I started taking evening walks alone after Emma's bedtime, needing space to process emotions I didn't want to bring into our carefully reconstructed home life. The neighborhood felt different at dusk, quieter, more honest somehow, like the darkening sky gave permission for deeper thoughts. During these walks, I allowed myself to feel angry at Patricia, sad about our lost innocence, worried about Emma's future understanding of family loyalty. These solo journeys became my way of leaving difficult emotions outside our front door before returning to the work of rebuilding. Was this healthy coping or avoidance disguised as self-care? Work provided welcome distraction from our domestic complications. My job at the community center involved coordinating after-school programs, and the cheerful chaos of children's activities felt refreshingly uncomplicated compared to adult relationship repair. When 10-year-old Marcus announced that his parents were getting divorced, I found myself offering the kind of reassurance I wished someone had given Emma during our darkest days. These innocent conversations reminded me that families survive all kinds of storms, though they don't always emerge unchanged. Could my professional experience helping other families inform my personal healing journey? David surprised me by suggesting we take a financial planning class together, something we'd never needed before Patricia's theft made us aware of our vulnerabilities. Sitting in a classroom with other couples learning about asset protection and emergency funds felt surreal, like studying for a test we'd already failed. But there was something empowering about taking concrete action, about refusing to remain victims of circumstances we couldn't control. Would knowledge and preparation help us feel safer, or just remind us constantly of potential threats? Emma's dance recital arrived with all the expected chaos of sequined costumes and nervous parents. Watching her perform with complete confidence and joy, I remembered why family struggles are worth enduring. These moments when love feels simple and uncomplicated. David reached for my hand during her solo, and for once his touch didn't carry the weight of apology or request for forgiveness. We were just parents sharing pride in our daughter's accomplishment. Could these glimpses of normalcy eventually become our new foundation instead of rare exceptions to ongoing tension? After the recital, Emma asked if Grandma Patricia had seen her dance. The question caught us both off guard, and David explained gently that Grandma was working on getting better and might not be ready for big events yet. Emma accepted this explanation with the resilience children often show when adults are honest without being overwhelming. Later, David confessed he'd considered inviting his mother to watch from the back row, but couldn't bring himself to risk the complications her presence might create. How long would fear of further hurt dictate our family decisions? Our marriage counselor introduced the concept of earned trust, the idea that trust isn't automatically restored, but rebuilt through consistent actions over time. This framework helped me understand why I still felt anxious when David made independent financial decisions, even small ones like buying lunch without mentioning it. My reactions weren't about the money itself, but about relearning faith in his judgment and consideration. Dr. Martinez assured us that this hyper-awareness would fade as new patterns of transparency proved reliable. But how many consistent actions would it take before vigilance transformed back into confidence? I reconnected with my college roommate Lisa during this period. Someone who'd known me before marriage and motherhood shaped my identity. Talking with her reminded me of aspects of myself I'd forgotten: my sense of humor, my independence, my ability to trust my own judgment about people and situations. She listened to our story without offering advice, just witnessing my experience with the kind of acceptance I'd struggled to give myself. These conversations helped me realize that rebuilding trust with David also required rebuilding trust in my own perceptions. Had I been too quick to doubt my instincts about our relationship? Summer brought a new rhythm as Emma's activities shifted from school to day camps and lazy mornings at home. David adjusted his work schedule to spend more time with us, and these ordinary family moments began to feel less fragile than they had in spring. We developed small rituals: Saturday morning pancakes, Wednesday evening bike rides, bedtime stories that David and I took turns reading. These simple practices became investments in our family's emotional bank account. Would consistency in small things eventually heal the damage caused by large betrayals? Patricia's treatment program required her to write letters of accountability to each family member she'd hurt. David's letter was pages long, detailing not just her financial crime, but years of small manipulations and controlling behaviors he'd never recognized as problematic. Reading excerpts aloud to me, his voice broke several times as he realized how his mother's influence had shaped his quick assumption of my guilt. Her patterns of creating doubt and division had apparently been subtle but consistent throughout our marriage. How much of our relationship had been influenced by someone else's dysfunction without our awareness? I decided to write my own letter to Patricia, not for her treatment program, but for my own healing process. Dr. Martinez had suggested that unexpressed emotions often resurface as physical symptoms or relationship difficulties. Writing allowed me to articulate the full scope of how her actions had affected not just our finances, but our sense of safety, our daughter's stability, our marriage's foundation. I didn't plan to send the letter, but creating it helped me understand the depth of my anger and grief. Could putting pain into words help transform it into something less destructive? Emma's swimming lessons that summer became a metaphor I couldn't ignore, watching her learn to trust the water to hold her up while she developed new skills. Some days she clung to the pool's edge, afraid to let go. Other days she jumped in fearlessly, forgetting previous struggles. Her instructor reminded parents that learning to swim requires both courage and practice, that setbacks are normal parts of progress. Watching Emma's determination to master something that initially scared her inspired my own willingness to keep working at trusting David, despite occasional moments of doubt. Our first major test came when David's promotion required him to travel for a week-long training conference. Old me would have celebrated this professional opportunity without a second thought. New me felt abandoned and suspicious, wondering if he was really attending seminars or meeting someone who might understand him better than his wife who'd been accused of theft. These irrational fears embarrassed me, but Dr. Martinez normalized them as part of healing from betrayal trauma. Still, I hated how Patricia's crime had infected my ability to think clearly about my husband's character. While David was away, Emma and I created our own adventure, exploring museums and parks I'd been too busy to visit during our crisis months. Her chatter filled the quiet spaces his absence created, and I rediscovered my capability as a solo parent and independent person. When he called each evening, I surprised myself by genuinely missing his voice rather than interrogating his activities. Perhaps healing meant learning to hold both trust and vulnerability simultaneously, rather than choosing between blind faith and constant suspicion. Could distance actually help us appreciate what we were working to rebuild? David returned from his conference with gifts: a snow globe for Emma and a book of poetry for me about resilience and hope. These thoughtful choices showed he'd been thinking of us during his travels, considering what might bring us joy rather than just fulfilling obligation. We spent his first evening home sharing stories from our separate weeks, and I realized how much our communication had improved since learning we couldn't take understanding for granted. Crisis had taught us to be more intentional with words, more careful with assumptions. Was this enhanced awareness a gift hidden within our trauma? Emma started a new school year that fall with confidence I envied and admired. She'd weathered our family's difficult months with remarkable resilience, emerging more empathetic toward other children facing their own struggles. Her teacher mentioned that Emma had become something of a peacekeeper on the playground, helping classmates resolve conflicts with patience beyond her years. David and I exchanged meaningful glances during the parent conference, realizing our daughter had learned valuable lessons about forgiveness and repair despite our efforts to shield her from adult complications. Perhaps children are stronger and wiser than we assume when we try to protect them from life's realities. As autumn settled around us with its reliable rhythm of changing leaves and school routines, I found myself thinking less about what we'd lost and more about what we were building together. Trust might never feel as effortless as it had before Patricia's betrayal, but perhaps conscious trust, earned and maintained through daily choices, was actually stronger than the unconscious assumptions we'd previously called faith. David and I were learning to love each other with our eyes open, aware of human capacity for both harm and healing. Our story wasn't ending with happily ever after, but with something more realistic and maybe more valuable. The commitment to keep choosing each other despite knowing how much we could hurt one another if we tried. Patricia's gambling counselor called in October, requesting a family mediation session. David stared at the phone after hanging up, his jaw tight with the familiar tension that appeared whenever his mother's recovery intersected with our healing. I watched him calculate something in his head: risk versus benefit, forgiveness versus protection. Emma was building a fort in the living room, oblivious to the weight settling over her parents again. Should we agree to meet the woman who'd nearly destroyed us? The mediation center smelled like industrial coffee and nervous sweat. Patricia looked smaller than I remembered, her usually perfect appearance replaced by something rawer, more human. She couldn't meet my eyes initially, focusing instead on David's hands folded carefully on the table between us. The counselor explained ground rules while I studied the woman who'd raised my husband, searching for signs of the person who'd stolen from us. Was genuine remorse possible after such calculated betrayal? "I need you to understand I never meant for David to blame you," Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. But intention felt irrelevant when weighed against impact. She'd chosen to let her son destroy his marriage rather than confess her crime. David's breathing changed beside me, shallow and controlled, like he was afraid of what might escape if he exhaled fully. The counselor guided us through structured dialogue while emotions churned beneath polite responses. Emma's Christmas list that year included parents who smile more, alongside the usual toys and books. Her innocent observation cut deeper than any therapy session, reminding us that children notice everything adults think they're hiding. David and I decided to host our first holiday gathering since the theft, inviting only people who knew our story and supported our healing. Creating new traditions felt safer than trying to recreate old ones that might trigger painful memories. I found Patricia's forgotten knitting supplies in our hall closet while decorating for Christmas. She'd left them during her last normal visit, before her desperation transformed her into someone capable of fraud. The half-finished baby blanket meant for our neighbor's new daughter felt like archaeological evidence of a different time when trust came easily. David suggested we return the supplies, but I wasn't ready for gestures that might signal forgiveness I hadn't fully processed. Emma asked if Grandma Patricia would visit for Christmas morning, like always. David and I had discussed this scenario with Dr. Martinez, but Emma's hopeful face made theoretical conversations suddenly concrete. We explained that some relationships need extra time to heal, that love doesn't always mean being together right away. She accepted this with the practical wisdom children develop when adults are honest about complexity. Her resilience continued to amaze me daily. New Year's Eve brought unexpected clarity as David and I sat on our back porch watching fireworks from the park down the street. The noise and celebration felt distant while we shared quiet reflection about the year that had tested everything we thought we knew about marriage. "I want to stop apologizing for doubting you," he said finally. "Not because I'm not sorry, but because I want to focus on proving I trust you now." His words felt like permission to move forward rather than constantly revisiting past wounds. Spring returned with Emma's 9th birthday and her request for a family camping trip. We'd avoided major excursions during our recovery period, but something about her confidence in our stability made the adventure feel possible. David researched campgrounds while I planned meals, and our easy collaboration on practical details felt like evidence of healing I hadn't noticed accumulating. Perhaps trust rebuilt itself through mundane cooperation as much as dramatic conversations. The camping trip tested our family dynamics in ways therapy sessions couldn't replicate. When Emma fell and scraped her knee on the hiking trail, David and I moved as a team, one comforting while the other retrieved first aid supplies, both focused entirely on her needs rather than our individual responses. That night, listening to her sleep peacefully between us in our tent, I realized how much stability we'd managed to create from broken pieces. Patricia's supervised visits with Emma evolved into independent outings by summer's end. Watching them leave together for ice cream adventures required more courage than I'd expected, but Emma's joy at reclaiming her grandmother relationship outweighed my protective instincts. David's goodbye hugs with his mother remained stilted, but Emma's natural affection seemed to ease something in Patricia's shoulders. Healing, apparently, happened at different speeds for different relationships within the same family. Our second anniversary of Bank Statement Day passed without either of us mentioning the date. I noticed David glancing at the calendar that morning, but we'd moved beyond marking trauma milestones like memorial services. Instead, we spent the day at Emma's soccer game, cheering her goals and laughing at her dramatic celebrations. Ordinary joy had replaced careful reconstruction as our primary family dynamic. Progress felt more like forgetting than like remembering. I returned to graduate school that fall, something I'd postponed when Emma was born and never reconsidered until our crisis forced me to examine what I wanted beyond marriage and motherhood. David supported my decision enthusiastically, taking over more household responsibilities without being asked. Watching him fold laundry while helping Emma with math homework, I felt grateful for the man he'd become through our difficulties rather than nostalgic for who he'd been before. Emma's class assignment about family heroes prompted her to choose me, not for anything dramatic, but for making good snacks and helping Daddy learn to say sorry better. Her innocent observation reminded me that children understand more than we assume about adult growth and change. She'd watched us practice forgiveness and accountability, learning lessons about relationships that might serve her throughout life. Perhaps our public struggles had offered unexpected gifts alongside undeniable pain. Patricia joined us for Emma's 10th birthday celebration, the first large family gathering since her theft. She brought homemade cupcakes and careful conversation, staying close to Emma but respectful of boundaries David and I had established. Watching 3 generations share cake and laughter in our backyard, I felt something like peace settling over our complicated love story. Not resolution exactly, but acceptance of imperfection as the price of authentic relationship. David and I celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary with a trip back to the cabin where we'd begun rebuilding 2 years earlier. The same trees surrounded us, but we were entirely different people sharing the familiar space. We talked about Emma's future, our career goals, places we wanted to travel together. Conversations focused forward rather than backward. Our love had survived the worst thing we could imagine, becoming something more intentional and less naive. Perhaps that was exactly what we needed for whatever challenges still waited ahead. Emma turned 13 the summer Patricia moved into the assisted living facility downtown. Age and diabetes had caught up with David's mother faster than anyone expected, but her mind remained sharp enough to make jokes about finally living somewhere that monitored her spending. She handed over her financial management to David without protest, a gesture that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier. Emma visited her twice weekly, sharing school gossip and teaching her phone games with patient affection. David's promotion to regional manager came with a company car and frequent travel, opportunities I encouraged despite my old fears about distance and trust. His suitcase sat open on our bed as he packed for Portland, and I added his favorite coffee packets without being asked. These small gestures of care had replaced the careful negotiations of our rebuilding years. Emma called from downstairs asking if Dad could drive her to soccer practice before his flight, her voice carrying easy assumption of family coordination. I finished my master's degree in social work the same week Emma started high school. She wore my graduation pin on her backpack, proud of parents who kept learning and growing instead of staying frozen in familiar patterns. My thesis research on financial abuse in families had been inspired by our experience, though I'd kept our story confidential. Dr. Martinez attended my graduation ceremony, smiling when I introduced her as the person who'd helped save my marriage. Emma's friend Sophia confided about her parents' divorce during a sleepover, asking if all adults eventually stop loving each other. I found myself sharing our story in age-appropriate terms, explaining that love sometimes requires fighting for it, that trust can break and heal stronger than before. Emma listened from the kitchen doorway, and later told me she was proud we'd chosen to stay together when things got hard. Her 14-year-old wisdom constantly surprised me. Patricia's gambling addiction support group asked her to sponsor a newcomer, a woman whose stealing had destroyed her relationship with her daughter. I overheard Patricia on the phone offering practical advice about making amends and rebuilding trust slowly. Her voice carried authority earned through loss and recovery, and I recognized the woman David had described from his childhood: strong, protective, wise. Perhaps redemption was possible for anyone willing to do the work honestly. David surprised me with tickets to Paris for our 20th anniversary, something we'd dreamed about during college but never prioritized over Emma's activities and household responsibilities. Planning the trip together felt luxurious after years of scheduling around therapy appointments and family mediations. Emma encouraged us to go, promising to stay with Sarah's family and keep up with schoolwork. Her confidence in our relationship's stability freed us to celebrate without guilt. The Louvre overwhelmed us both, but standing before ancient sculptures that had survived wars and revolutions put our struggles into perspective. David held my hand as we wandered through galleries, and I noticed we'd stopped checking his phone for messages every few minutes. Trust had become unconscious again, built through years of consistent choices rather than dramatic declarations. We were different people than we'd been before Patricia's betrayal. More careful, but also more grateful. Emma joined student government her sophomore year, running on a platform of conflict resolution and peer mediation. Her campaign speech referenced families who work through problems together, and several parents approached me afterward asking about our experience with counseling. I realized our story had become something larger than personal trauma. An example that marriages could survive devastating betrayals if both people committed to healing honestly. Patricia's health declined rapidly that winter, and David spent weekends managing her medical appointments while Emma and I visited with homework and card games. Watching them together, grandmother teaching granddaughter to knit, Emma reading aloud from young adult novels, I saw love that had survived terrible damage and emerged scarred but genuine. Death was approaching, and petty grudges felt pointless in its shadow. I started teaching financial literacy classes at the community center, helping people recognize signs of gambling addiction and financial abuse. Many students were women like I'd been, trusting spouses who'd never imagined needing to protect themselves from people they loved. These classes became my way of transforming our pain into practical help for others. David often picked me up afterward, proud of the work I was doing. Emma's junior year brought college planning conversations that excited and terrified us equally. She wanted to study psychology, inspired by watching our family heal and her grandmother recover. We toured campuses together, and I watched David struggle with the approaching empty nest while trying to celebrate Emma's independence. Our marriage would soon be just the two of us again, a prospect that felt hopeful rather than frightening. Patricia died peacefully on a Tuesday morning in March while Emma was at school. David held her hand as she passed, and later told me her last words were apologies and gratitude for his forgiveness. The funeral drew people from her support group, women whose lives she'd touched through her sponsorship work. Emma spoke beautifully about her grandmother's courage in facing mistakes and working to repair damage. Cleaning out Patricia's apartment, we found journals documenting her gambling addiction and recovery journey. She'd written extensively about her regret over our situation, her pride in David's marriage, her love for Emma. Reading these private thoughts helped David understand his mother's transformation wasn't performed for our benefit, but genuine change she'd fought to achieve. Forgiveness felt complete in ways forced conversations never could have accomplished. Emma graduated valedictorian with a speech about resilience and family love that left most parents crying. She thanked us publicly for showing her that problems could be solved and relationships repaired with patience and commitment. Watching her walk across that stage, confident and kind and wise beyond her years, I felt grateful for every struggle that had shaped our family's character. Our difficulties had become her strengths. Her college acceptance to Northwestern came with a psychology scholarship that covered most expenses. Emma planned to specialize in family therapy, wanting to help others navigate the kind of crisis we'd survived. David and I exchanged proud glances as she described her goals, recognizing how our worst experience had inspired her life's direction. Sometimes redemption comes through the next generation's choices, rather than our own healing. The night before Emma left for college, she found us on the back porch where we'd shared so many difficult conversations. She thanked us for staying together, for working through problems instead of giving up, for showing her that love requires both faith and action. Her words felt like benediction on years of struggle and growth. David reached for my hand as we watched her pack, and I marveled at the family we'd become. Emma's freshman year letters home were filled with excitement about her studies and new friendships. She'd joined a support group for children of addiction, finding community with peers who understood complicated family relationships. Her strength and wisdom inspired other students, and I realized she was already becoming the therapist she'd dreamed of being. Our crisis had prepared her for her calling. David and I rediscovered each other slowly in our empty house. Without Emma's schedule to coordinate around, we had to learn new rhythms of marriage and individual growth. We took cooking classes together, traveled to places we'd always postponed, and talked for hours without interruption. 23 years of marriage had taught us that love evolves, requiring constant choice and recommitment rather than automatic continuation. I published an article about financial abuse recovery that mentioned our story anonymously. The response overwhelmed me. Emails from families facing similar situations, requests for speaking engagements, invitations to collaborate on research projects. Our private pain had become public purpose, helping others navigate betrayal and reconstruction. David supported these new opportunities enthusiastically, proud of the woman his wife had become through adversity. On our 25th anniversary, we returned to the church where we'd married, renewing vows that now carried weight of experience rather than hopeful theory. Emma served as our witness, beautiful in her graduation dress, representing the future we'd fought to protect. Our promises to each other were simpler now, less about perfection and more about persistence. We'd learned that love isn't a feeling but a choice made daily, especially when feelings fail. Standing before family and friends who'd supported us through our darkest period, I felt grateful not for an easy life, but for a real one. Messy and difficult, and ultimately worth every moment of struggle it had taken to build something true together.